Welcome back to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I'm really excited today because we have like a multinational kind of approach to things. We are going to be chatting with Michael Wilkinson, Product Director of Torchbox Limited. Michael, welcome.
Hey, Julia. Nice to be here.
So from that brief introduction, if you didn't catch it, Michael is British. But the best part, where are you coming to us from?
I am in Mexico City today.
Awesome. Well, we really love this opportunity to get different viewpoints about things going around the world in the nonprofit, in the NGO sector. And so you had the most interesting thing that you did, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But we're really going to address 6 key challenges that UK charities face. And this really came from some in-depth work that you've done. And so I can't wait to chat with you about this. I'm flying solo today, but we have this amazing co-host panel. And I know that many of them wanted to be on this episode, but I was like, nope, I'm holding this one to myself so that I get all my questions answered first. So join us when they're with the Nonprofit Show, because they're truly amazing. Another thing that's amazing is we have fabulous presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and 180 Management Group. Okay, to the man of the hour, Michael Wilkinson. Okay, tell me how you got this data and what you did to get these nonprofits to open up to you.
Yeah, well, before the pandemic, I used to go to lots of networking events, conferences, like we all did. And then just, being in the sort of wilderness and being sort of kind of very internally focused during the pandemic, we were all trying to sort of get through it, weren't we? I just felt as we were coming out the other end of it, I really wanted to reconnect with people and see what was going on in other charities and just see what the kind of common problems were that we were trying to solve. So I figured, why don't we try to meet people virtually? I had moved out of London, so it was more difficult for me to kind of get to see people in person. So I set myself a challenge of meeting 100 charity leaders for a virtual coffee. And I have just done it. So it's been quite a ride.
I love it. Now, between Mexico City and London, or Great Britain in general, that's a 9-hour time difference, right?
It's 7 hours. Yeah, it was quite a lot.
7. Okay, 7. So that's like a full day, basically. I mean, you're trying to juggle all this. Talk to me how you did that and continue to do your work at Torchbox. And let's start off with what Torchbox does.
Yeah, so Torchbox is a UK digital agency, but we work with charities right across the world, particularly in the United States and the UK. And we were established 24 years ago with the purpose of doing digital for social good. And it was one of the first of its kind in the UK. It's 100% employee owned as a company as well, which is, I think, super interesting because we're all co-owners. And we work exclusively with nonprofits, public sector, higher education, any kind of socially progressive organizations. And we do everything right from sort of digital marketing through to designing and building websites and applications, a lot of human-centered design approaches, and basically with the idea of helping to grow your income, recruit more volunteers, develop digital services, that sort of thing.
Right. I love it. Well, this is going to be a great conversation because I'm all up for seeing how other folks do things, what we can learn from, and then kind of seeing how, people are grappling with different issues. So the first challenge you identified is that there's a mismatch between funding and project goals. Talk to us about that. And what does that look like?
Yeah, so this, I think, is not a new problem. It's been something that's been kind of like a perennial problem ever since really we started to do more work digitally. Unfortunately, a lot of charities get their funding from sort of grants, trusts, foundations, and these sources of income just haven't sort of caught up with the needs of charities in the sort of modern digital era. So what that means in practice is that a lot of charities really struggle to get funding for new digital initiatives. I think partly because some of these funders don't understand it so much. They don't understand the sort of tangible outcomes that the projects could deliver in the same way that delivering a face-to-face service, it's easier for them to wrap their heads around. And I think the other challenge as well is that there are a lot of back office costs that are crucial to delivering digital services. So they're thinking about the technology and the people and the resources. And quite often those are not fundable by these sources of income. And so 45% of charities in a recent UK survey said that they were really struggling to access this sort of digital funding. And then when you actually look at Black-led charities, this problem is even more amplified as well. So that's been kind of a new issue that's been coming up this year. And certainly in the conversations I've had, people have really sort of said it's been quite hard to sort of get these exciting digital projects off the ground.
Yeah. Michael, it's such an interesting thing. I spent a couple weeks in the UK summer before last and had an opportunity to evaluate some fundraising things that were going on. And it's so interesting because I feel like in the US, the fear is that we move to the government last because it's going to be so unstable. Like we're not going to have a funding source that's stable, not the government itself, but the funding source, versus the concept that we need to go after that $10 donor, that $15 donor. We need to go after the individuals. And so it's a really interesting flip with how we communicate, how we strategize, and how we look for funding. Because, every 1.8 million nonprofits registered in the US, they're all chasing the buck, right? They're all chasing the dollar. And so it's interesting to hear this perspective from you, because that's got to be absolutely brutal, because if you're working on these long-term relationships for this funding and they go south, you must feel like you're just never going to be able to open your doors, right?
Right. This is the problem. In the past, we had it quite good, and government grants were flowing, and they allowed us to fund lots of different services. And we now live in much leaner times, right? Both in the US and the UK.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, government grants have been slashed left, right, and centre, and charities have been forced to sort of look for other sources of funding.
Right.
And it can feel quite sort of powerless in the sense that like this is kind of out of your control. But I think the thing I've seen, the best examples I've seen are where charities really double down on trying to diversify their income streams. The more they can do that, it protects you, I think, from this sort of greater level of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's so much healthier. Well, let's go on to challenge number 2, dealing with financial downturn. Now, this is really, important, because if you are a charity in the United Kingdom and you are looking to partner with government, local or national, and then you see these financial shifts, again, another terrifying thing, right? How do they deal with this?
Right. Yeah. So obviously, you've seen in the US so much volatility because of interest rates, etc.
Yeah.
Same picture in the UK. The last year or so has been so bumpy, and one of the ways in which, unfortunately, charities have had to deal with this is by pausing or stopping entirely different projects that they'd hoped to get off the ground in the last year. So we saw a sort of flatlining in the past 12 months. And we certainly saw that at Torchbox, where charities weren't able to get the projects off the ground that they wanted to. I do say, though, I feel quite optimistic. I know in the last 24 hours we've had some craziness with the stock markets, etc. But I do feel like a sense of some green shoots now. Interest rates are sort of calming down. We've certainly seen an uptick in charities wanting to do more things again, which is nice to see. And in some recent surveys as well, there's a big survey of UK charities recently that that showed that 75% of the public had said they donated to a nonprofit in the last 3 months. So I feel like that gives me a kind of cause for optimism.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I think that's really cool. And I think that, organizations that have more success with that and connecting with those donors, and expanding their liability, if you will, from, just having that one funding source, which can be so frightening, that's just going to breed more success, right? Because other organizations will take a look at that and learn from it. So very, very interesting. Well, let's go on to number 3. Struggle to keeping up with tech changes. My friend, this is a global issue. I got to believe that if you start your next thing and that's 100 T's with 100 American organizations, this is going to come up, right?
Totally. This was a big conversation starter.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very thin edge of this, you've got things like AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like strap your seatbelts on because this thing is going so darn fast.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to sort of keep hold of that agenda for nonprofits. They have fewer resources. We don't necessarily have the leadership that fully understands this emerging technology. And, it's just been such a big topic of the conversations I've had, certainly in the reports that are coming out as well. There is just real evidence to show that a lot of charities have not got a proper strategy in place with this. It's been sort of let loose with employees sort of dabbling with it themselves, but actually charities haven't really engaged with AI. And that's AI, right? But we're not getting the basics right. So there's like a whole other layer of technology and just the general shift in human behaviors with technology that charities need to keep up with. And I think like we need to get those things right, whilst at the same time trying to hang on the coattails of AI as well. So it's a huge challenge, this one.
You know what? I love that you said this, and I haven't heard anyone actually draw that line across. I think you're very, very spot on. In the US, there was virtually a handful of nonprofits, and they were like big institutions that really had started to embrace, digital fundraising prior to the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, I think nonprofits were forced to really move into a more of a digital framework, but they hadn't budgeted for it. They hadn't planned for it. I loved what you said. They didn't have the intellectual or even, dare I say, the spiritual leadership, that says, come on, we're going to do this. And it's just kind of been sloughed off. So this was really a cool thing for you to point out, that we need to get it right at the base so that then we can move up.
Well, 1 in 4 UK charities don't engage with digital fundraising at all. Okay, so we're not even doing that. AI feels quite elite, doesn't it? So,
Right.
and it's thinking about digital strategies as well, right? So the tech is one thing, but it's what you do with it, right? And how you bring people with you. Only half of UK charities say they have any kind of digital strategy. And I think it's something like, I think it was off the top of my head, like 14% of them say that they actually feel like that's embedded in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real disconnect between like what we think we should be doing and what we're actually doing.
Right. That is a fascinating thing, to think that you've only got, 25% engaged. And then within that 25%, 14% feels confident in navigating it forward. It will be so fascinating to see if you can determine over the course of time that 25%, 14%, how much further they are on the journey. Like what has been, the result of that investment, and even just understanding it, right? Just buying into it.
Yeah, and I would say, like, I was a digital leader in charities for 7 years, and sometimes it can feel like you're a sort of lone free ranger. And the thing that came out of the virtual coffees was when I spoke to people who were in my shoes. They were really struggling to get that kind of buy-in from the wider leadership. There's an appetite for it amongst the employees, but it's how do you sort of take everybody with you?
Right.
That's been a real challenge, not only for myself in my career, but for the people I spoke to on the virtual coffees.
Wow, fascinating stuff. Well, let's go to challenge 4. And I want to spend a little bit more time with this because I would love for you to explain how it's different in the United Kingdom and in Europe in general when it comes to the ownership and the management and the security of data and personal information. My personal opinion is that what you all have done there is moving across to us. And it will be a hell of a shock to most American nonprofits because they'll be like, what? We can't do this?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, as you said at the top of the show, I am based in Mexico City, but obviously I'm British. The parallel, like the sort of differences, are unbelievable, right? And I think maybe the US is very similar to the Mexico in the sense of
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a free for all.
Oh, yeah.
I've got two phones, a UK one and a Mexican one. And the Mexican one, I dare not pick up the phone because you are being hounded constantly. There are no restrictions whatsoever. They find ways of getting hold of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. In the UK, when sometimes I get one of those kind of rogue cold calls, I'm like, how dare you? Like, how did you get my number? I feel quite affronted. And so that's the sort of difference in the mentality. I
Yeah.
think we really don't like that, the misuse of our data in that way. And so that's because we've just got such strong privacy laws compared to the States. So that's always a huge consideration for charities about how you can use the data in a responsible way.
Mhm. Well, Michael, it's got to make it even more fearful or for a nonprofit, a charity in the United Kingdom to say, we're not even going to invest in this type of technology because we can't get to the people we need to get to, right? I mean, it's got to seem like you're working with such a small number. Is that true or is that not true?
No, I don't believe that to be true. I think there's some like sort of fear, I guess, around how to use data, and certainly the conversations I'm having with charity leaders is that this is a big area of focus this year, but people do worry about. What are the best ways not only to collect the data but how to use it? And again, unfortunately, similar to technology, there are low skills in this area in terms of
Yes.
using the data, and the data is only as good as what you do with it, right? So I think there's a renewed focus on how can we, engage new people, new audiences, but then what do we do with that? And that's certainly like some of the projects I've been focused on lately have been very much about that. And if I may just give one example to bring it to life, I've recently been working with a charity that provides assistance dogs to help people with disabilities. And their data was like all over the shop. They were collecting lots of data, but didn't really know like which parts were important.
Mhm.
The data hadn't been cleaned up. And as a result, they weren't bringing in enough volunteers to take on these assistance dogs to, when they become puppies, to train them
Yeah.
up. So it created a whole situation for their volunteering. And by cleaning the data, thinking about what's really, really important, and just getting much better sight of it, and then making some changes to the user experience, we have absolutely blown up the volunteering. It's been amazing in just the last month to see how many people are now coming through the door. And the whole decision making process is now data driven. And that's so nice because now we can see, okay, next month we've got this number of people coming in. Okay,
Yeah.
we're seeing this problem area here. What can we do? Can we switch some more resources to this? And that's the beauty of data once you start to get it to work for you.
Okay, so this is the curveball question. Does this organization and does your team think that you can convert some of these volunteers into donors?
Well, I think you've got to think about volunteers maybe slightly differently,
Yeah.
in that the time that they give is just as valuable, if not more valuable than just being like a regular donor, for example. I mean, I'm sure there is definitely a sort of intersection, right?
Yeah.
But I think What I'm seeing with a lot of charities in the UK is that volunteering is becoming increasingly a central pillar to their activities.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about government grants being slashed, all that sort of stuff. We've now got to rely increasingly on volunteers to be the sort of backbone of charities. I mean, they always have been, but I think it's becoming ever more important. And so it's about recognizing that value that they can provide.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a big conversation here. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that feel like you should never, ever, ever ask a volunteer to become a donor because they're donating their time, talent, and treasure of some degree, and to value that. But then there are others that are like, these can be your best champions because they're boots on the ground and they can see what you need and how you work and how you steward. So this is a fascinating question. It really, really is, that has yet to be answered fully.
Definitely. And also, but not all volunteers are made equal, right? You also have young people, the sort of Gen Zs, that have time and they want to give it to something that they really feel passionate about and that they believe in, but they are cash poor. They can't give regularly in the same way that the older donors can. And so, you've got to really think about people as individuals, and not everybody is in the same situation, but how can we best utilize, what that person might have to offer?
Right. And to this challenge, it goes back to data. I mean, the better you've tracked who these folks are and what they're doing for you and how they feel about your organization, I think you can be a much better steward of that relationship, right? So very, very interesting. Well, let's go to number 5, using human-centered design approaches. Now, this is a big Torchbox value and pillar that you all work with. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, so I actually think this is probably where we start to see the biggest distinctions between the US and the UK. I think certainly when I talk to people that are not from the UK, there is a sort of slight admiration, I guess, for sort of British design principles, and the fact that we are so human-centered in our work. So I think that's something that's it's quite British, and I think it's a very important part of what we do at Torchbox. When I approach potential charity clients, often you don't sort of see the light switching on upstairs in terms of like the value of doing that user research and connecting with people to find out like what are the problems we're trying to solve. But when you do it and you do manage to persuade people to invest a little bit in researching with people and designing around their needs, wow, then the magic happens, because it just delivers results in a way that people don't expect. You're able to solve like the problems at the sort of crux of it, and I think that's the beauty of human-centered design. And so it's a really big part of what we try to do at Torchbox throughout most of our projects.
Right. I think it's for so many organizations here, it's just kind of, it goes against that savior mentality, right? Like, I know what's best for you. And so if you just listen to me, I'm going to solve the problem, versus communicating with the community and saying, what is the problem? What are the solutions? What are you looking for? And we don't do that enough. It's a really, to me, it's a critical thinking issue, because when we have leadership and we have boards of directors that don't even begin to see that as a value, that's a heavy lift, right? That's a heavy lift.
I agree, Julia, and I think there's a couple of things here. So the one fact is that most people who work in a charity actually rarely come into contact with the end user. And so I think that's an issue, in that there's a sort of disconnect between the sort of back office and the people that you're there to help. And then I think the other thing in my reflection is, when I first entered the nonprofit sector, my first role, I certainly got that sense of, there are lots of people with lots of years of experience in nonprofits, and that's incredibly valued. They're subject experts totally. But there is a sort of culture of assumption-based thinking.
Yes.
Like, I've got all these years of experience, so I know and I can advocate for the people that we help. And I think with human-centered design thinking, that no longer really fits. Subject expertise is really important to inform, when we start to ideate around like what solutions might help people.
Mhm.
But actually, the real way to kind of get to this is by going straight to the horse's mouth and really finding out, what are those problems that people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives, and then crafting solutions around that.
Absolutely. To me, this is like one of my biggest pet peeves about the sector is that we don't, I call it dog fooding. I didn't create that, but
Yeah.
we don't taste the dog's food, right? We don't know what's going on. And I love that you called this out because I think that is one of the things that is like one of the biggest detriments to a nonprofit success in terms of achieving mission. Let's go on to number 6, labor issues across the organization. Whew, big topic.
Yeah, we could talk for hours just on this one. Now, I know I read reports in the US that a lot of nonprofits have been struggling to fill a lot of roles. I think in the UK, it's been interesting since the pandemic. We have been at the vanguard of flexible working, but we're sort of diverging into sort of two paths. You've got the sort of charities that really embrace flexible working. And the last charity that I worked for, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People, decided to go fully remote, digital first for most of its employees. And as a hiring manager, that was amazing for me because we were being flooded with applications because candidates now expect a whole lot more. You then got other charities who are trying to come back to more traditional ways of working, and I think they will inevitably encounter problems in a market where candidates expect a whole lot more. I think the other challenge that charities are facing is that there's more competition now. So traditionally, people would want to work for a charity and they would never sort of look twice at maybe moving into a commercial environment. But now what we're seeing, and I certainly found this in my recruitment challenges, is that a lot of companies now are much more socially progressive.
Yes.
They have a stronger agenda there, and actually it's become much more attractive for those charity-minded people to want to work in those companies. So there's lots of positives, but charities need to be leaning into them. And this was probably the number one topic of the virtual coffees. Because we'd gone fully remote, everybody wanted to ask me questions about that and to find out kind of what happened next.
Wow. Well, I think it is a big question. What is going to happen next? And I agree with you. I think it's one of those things that is such a huge topic because there's so many new things going on. And I agree with you. We haven't been talking about this enough, but I think the for-profit sector figuring out that when there is some sort of philanthropic connector, it increases job satisfaction and it makes people feel like, they're not just making money for the man, but they're adding something to society, into civil society, right? So I think this is a very, very interesting thing to be watching for. I mean, I'm having this conversation with a man who lives and works from Mexico City for a British company, and I host an American-based show, right? So it's the perfect example of this confluence.
Yeah, it's just, and that's beautiful. We're connecting with people that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to connect with.
Yeah.
And I think that's really special. We do most of our work remotely with our clients. I have a number of clients based in the US, and it's great. I love that. I absolutely love that. I think the other thing I would say that this is more on the charity leaders is skills in the labor market as well. There's a real need to focus on digital skills, and this becomes an increasing problem every year because tech is moving on so fast. And I think there's also a divergence between large charities and smaller charities, and the smaller charities really struggling to keep up pace. So I think that's the other argument on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been amazing. I mean, I warned you our time was going to fly by, and it has. I have so many more questions to ask you. You really made me think about a lot of new and different things. And so we do need to get you back on. Michael Wilkinson, Product Director of Torchbox. Check out torchbox.com. They have a lot of thought leadership articles and pieces that will really give you some ideas about what they're looking at. I think especially when and if you are a nonprofit that's looking to work with donors in a different part, not even just of your own state, but maybe your region or globally, it's such a fascinating thing to delve into, to see, what how the minds of a culture works when it comes to charitable efforts. And so, fascinating conversation. Now, Michael, we need to invite you to have a virtual tea with American leaders, right?
Exactly. I've done my 100 cups of coffee. That's a lot of coffee for one person. So I would now like 100 virtual cups of tea stateside. So do hit me up on LinkedIn and let's have a cup of tea.
I love it. Well, we need to help you with that because, it's such a fascinating industry here. 1.8 million nonprofits registered in the US, and they're all doing a lot of different things differently, I should say. So, most definitely check out Michael. As he said, you can connect with him on LinkedIn and also visit torchbox.com. Again, we want to thank our presenting sponsors. Without them, we would not have been able to chat with Michael and have this riveting conversation, which I hope we will have again with him. And those sponsors include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and 180 Management Group. They're here with us day in and day out so that we can have these amazing conversations. Michael, fascinating. You really gave me some new things to think about. And I really hope that we can stay connected and have you back on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much.
It's been a lot of fun. Hey, everybody, we sign off each episode of the Nonprofit Show with this message. And it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks.